Hello, welcome to Thursday Garden Chat, which is the weekly free broadcast run by Garden Masterclass. Our normal business is putting on day workshops led by garden and landscape experts across Great Britain and Ireland, and increasingly on the European mainland as well. Since the pandemic, however, we have gone global. We have started doing online broadcasts. A lot of these are pay-to-view webinars, which we do with garden and landscape experts from all over the world to our global audience. However, this event is our Thursday Garden Chat, which is a pro bono. It's a free event which we put on every Thursday for an hour with somebody who is a gardener. It could be a head gardener, a botanist, a garden historian, a photographer, a designer, a huge range of people we talk to. And these are recorded and they go up on our YouTube channel and we keep them there for a couple of months. The best content then goes to our members channel, but at any one time we've got something up to 100 hours of free, really interesting garden viewing on YouTube. Now, we do this for free and we would really appreciate donations to help with our running costs, and you can do this with the donate button which you can find on the online page of our website. Stan, we get all over the place.
Yeah, we're not always in Devon.
Not always in Devon. No,
although there's a good reason to be in Devon.
Yes, if we're not in Devon, we tend to be in Pennsylvania as well. So this evening it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mary Benger, whose garden, Burrow Farm Gardens, I first visited a good few years ago because she's not that far from Bristol, and I used to live in Bristol for many years. Southwest is an area I know and love very well. It's always loved this garden. It's in this absolutely quintessential West Country landscape. It's a wonderfully unpretentious, skillful garden, a huge amount of plant interest, lots of different garden features, everything designed and chosen by Mary. So it feels a very personal garden, and one that isn't trying too hard to be fashionable and it's also, what interests me is that it's started off in a farm. And one of the things that intrigues me is that Mary, over the years, has obviously nibbled away at the family farm. So I was just wondering how well that's gone down with the rest of the family. But of course, in terms of economic diversification, a very sensible thing to do. And farming is, as I think we all know, a pretty risky business. And so having a garden that's open to the public with a wonderful tea shop and a nursery, is a great way of diversifying. And it is, it is a garden I very much love, and it gives me great pleasure to have Mary on board. And I think should just flag up actually that a couple of years ago, she wrote a book about the making of the garden and very kindly asked me to do the foreword. And that does give you a really good insight into all the sort of the processes of garden making. But I expect she'll mention that at the end. Anyway, over to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Nell. That was a nice introduction. Now I'm starting the talk with a picture of the door which leads down from the nursery to the, gives you a good glimpse onto the East Devon countryside there. Now this is an introduction to Burrow Farm Gardens, East Devon's secret garden. Luckily it is becoming a little more well known now, and not quite such a secret. Now this is what I've tried to do is select pictures which sort of show the history through the garden. And this was the start, and this is where you enter the garden. The Hawthorne Hedge on the right hand side there, it looks quite reasonable in that picture, but in fact it got rather sparse and a lot of ivy in it. So on the spur of the moment, one day during the winter, we decided to rip it all out and build this wall instead. What's particularly nice about this is we've got probably only about 6 inches of soil and gravel on the top, but it enables me to grow all the kind of things that struggle in the garden because it's such heavy clay, but this provides the good drainage. And then on the north side, which is the left-hand side, we're able to grow shade-loving plants. It's particularly good. I've got a lot of areas in the garden that are shady, but this, of course, has full light above it. So there's some things that really do particularly well there. Now, this was the house when we started off. It was John and I, when we moved there in 1959, we had a timber and asbestos bungalow to live in. And we lived in that for 32 years and brought up 4 children. But the house now looks like this, which is certainly significantly different and a joy to live in. Now, the inspiration for really starting the garden, I did start it just round the house, but I kept, as Noel said, I kept nibbling away at little bits and adding a few feet at a time. And my husband got quite fed up with it because he said the cows would be starved if I went on at this rate. And so in one of the fields, we had an old Roman clay pit. And of course, as far as farming was concerned, that was a bit of waste ground. But on the edge of this waste ground was growing this lovely Acer campestri, the field maple. And around the bowl of it were ferns and bluebells and primroses. So I said to John, well, what I'd really like to do is to try and make a garden down in that old Roman clay pit. And he was so relieved that I wasn't going to pinch another field that he said, oh, you can do what you like down there. I think probably he hadn't got in mind me gardening down there for the next 60 years, but that's in fact what's happened. My labour force to start with were my 4 children, and this is perhaps the kind of gardening that children particularly enjoy, when it's digging streams out and digging ponds and having bonfires and that sort of thing. That's Tony, my eldest son, doing the sort of things he really enjoys doing. And there he's got the chopper doing pegs, and sledgehammer is the required tool. And we were making steps up and down the steep sides of the quarry. A few years on, and they look like this. It was, again, you can see on the left-hand side the field maple, but with the addition of other things growing now, the evergreen azalea in the foreground. And then down in the bottom, it was extremely fertile soil because the farm drains had run down there for quite a few years. And so there was a lot of fertility and moisture. The skunk cabbage there, you can see the large leaves of it. And on the edge where it's not quite so boggy, some of the large-leaved rhododendrons flourish, and of course in the foreground there, bluebells and Allium trichurtum. There we are looking across it with the candelabra primulas. This is Primula pulverulenta with the lovely white mealy stems. Still looking across the pond, and the tree in the background is Malus hupahensis. It's grown to an enormous size, much bigger than I ever expected it to, but in full flower at the moment in the garden. Rhododendrons and azaleas, sort of, you have to choose the right place within the quarry to grow them, because in some areas with all these mature trees you will have be quite a build up of leaf mold, and if you plant in those areas then that they grow well enough. Now back to the beginning again, and this is the cows just coming into for milking, and if you bear in mind that was probably 1960, and the same scene, same area now looks like that, not really recognizable. In the background there on the left, two field maples, Acer palmatum, Japanese maples, and they're seedlings, and they were, when I first started the garden, I bought 25 just seedling palmatum, and they've done extremely well. This sort of area, I've tried to stick to the yellows and oranges sort of colouring, and there we've got one of the Bishop's children dahlias, and grown from seed, and they have that lovely dark foliage. We've also got we've moved a little bit further back now, and we've put a swing seat in there, sitting spiritually seat. They put them in there as a way of advertisement. Now we're looking down through the garden. We've just gone over that cobbled bridge, and looking out, we can just see the view there. And this was how it started, with a hedge across the bottom there, and daffodils and things. And this is how it looks now. With we built a ha-ha there, where you see at the end of the green. Doesn't quite have the same effect when the farmer ploughs the field just beyond your ha-ha, but it doesn't happen very often. Most of the time it's green, and it looks very strange, and if a bit nerve-wracking when his cows walk right up to the ha-ha. You suddenly think, oh gosh, they've got in the garden, but no. And the hydrangea on the right-hand side is Blue Wave. Of course, we do have a lovely climate in Devon, but just sometimes it looks like that. So we do have snow occasionally, but on the whole, we have a very good mild climate. Now we've gone up to we call this the Rose Garden, or pergola walk, and this started off as just a paddock, and then I built the pergola and these paving along the crazy paving was some old pavements from Ottery St Mary, which is a town near us. The climbers, I'm never very good at pruning. I tend to leave things far too long, and you can imagine pruning on top of a 6-foot ladder is not the easiest thing. So it was a job I always put off, but eventually the climbers got so heavy in one good storm, half the pergola blew down. So then the decision whether to carry on and build it up again or not, no, we decided in the end just to take it all down and convert the garden into more of a Mediterranean type. And their statue's still in the same place, but it's an entirely different mix of flowers that I'm able to grow right out in the open, and you get quite a lot of reflected heat from the paving, I've found. But they're quite ordinary sort of countryside plants. Forget-me-nots I love, going through all of this, and the whole area this time of the year has pink campions growing. And I love to leave the wildflowers where I can, if they're the right sort of colour combination. and pink goes so well here. The Shy Maiden in the middle with Lapita Walker's Low. Forget-me-nots this time with Veronica gentianoides. I quite enjoy slightly different colours rather than complete contrasts. And this is a combination I like. Peonies in the background there. Now this is a scene in the spring, the same area, which I wish I could repeat, but tulips I just cannot grow. Mainly because in spite of having fenced it fairly well, the deer are determined to get in there, and tulips are caviar to them. They cannot leave them alone. And if they're not doing it, then the rabbits are doing it. So this year I was just lucky with them, but never since. Later on in the year, the Lythrum flower candle is the spires there. And over on the left-hand side, the hydrangea limelight, a nice greeny white, which gradually gets a little hint of pink on it. And the umbellifera in the foreground there is a purple-leaved angelica called Vicar's Mead. Agastache, the mauve there, and the foliage on the right-hand side is Melianthus major, and this gets to about 6 feet tall by the end of the season. I let it go on for several years, and then I have a really good prune right down to the ground, and then it comes up bushy again. Cosmos, I only get spare gaps in the spring. I raise a few annuals and plant those out, but I don't do much of that type of thing. It's a bit labour intensive for my garden. A Berberis red chief is the Berberis in the middle of the picture, with Elaeagnus quicksilver behind it. I can remember when I bought my first Elaeagnus quicksilver, I thought it was dying in the autumn because I hadn't realised that it's actually a deciduous Elaeagnus, but it has lovely flowers, very, very small, perhaps insignificant, but the flowers in the axils of the leaf have a most delicious smell. Penstemons in the foreground there. Now, when in 1999 I went up to London to the Chelsea Flower Show, and on an impulse I put a deposit on a trough, a lead trough which had 2000 written on it, and everyone had millennium fever that year. So I was coming home on the train and I thought, where on earth am I going to put this trough? And gradually the whole idea of building a complete garden to put the trough in began to develop. And this is building the summer house on one corner of the area I decided to make into my millennium garden. More construction there. And the whole idea was I wanted to build a rill down the centre of the garden, which sort of led your eye out onto the wonderful view beyond it. And there, everyone's working on it. Or, John Hawkins, who was worked for me for 38 years, I think, he's building the wall there. And a student that was with us for one summer. Another part of my labour force there, 2 of my grandchildren. What I decided to do was to get each of my grandchildren to plant something in the Millennium Garden as a celebration. And there James is putting his back into digging a hole for a magnolia, and Alice behind there is preparing a hole for hers. We're quite often helped by a series of dogs, and there are 2 of them. Now the other 2 children, who are different family, they're planting wisterias with a cat and a dog looking on, and Tim's just putting the final touches to it, and Jess looking on. Those are the wisterias they planted, and we're now looking up the Millennium Garden, up through the rill there. This was the wall that you saw them building in the first place, and looking beyond to the door that we started the talk with. John Hawkins, who did all the stonework, he didn't like what he called Mary's fiddly bits, and I really wanted these. Well, we built 2 of them, in fact, 2 circular windows, and he said, "Oh, if you want something fiddly like that, you must do that." So this was my effort at stonework. I actually got a motor tower from one of the farm implements, and then put it in place, and then built the stone around it. And it's always quite nerve-wracking when you take the tower out. Is it all going to stay there? But it did, and we built 2 of these circular windows. Now, when I did the Millennium Garden, I said, now this is going to be the last bit of new garden I do. But I had always been looking down at this little bit of field where the cows are, and it was always quite a boggy area, because it's just below the Roman clay pit. And then Tony said to me that, because he has machinery for the landscape, he said, "I've got a digger with half an hour to spare. Is there anything you want done, Mum?" And I said, "Well, there is that field down below the quarry where I'd just like him to dig a small hole about 3 foot by 3 foot, and then we'll leave it for the summer and see whether it'll hold water, because the soil down there was so clay." So the digger trundled his way down there, and as you can see, we got a bit carried away. The first scoop he did, he went through a field drain, and water was coming out of it, and it was such pure clay. He said, "Oh, I'm sure this will hold water." And of course, digging a big pond or lake like this, the first thing you have to do is strip all the topsoil off, and there you can see the topsoil heap over on the left. And then you dig the excavation and build the dam round the right-hand side, and then the soil goes back. We did it in sort of April time, and I thought, I'm going to have to look at an empty pond, and we'd go in it and we'd puddle it all and walk up and down, and we might even take the horses in there and try and get them to puddle the clay to hold water. But the next morning it had rained, and all the field that you can see sloping down on the right hand side, it was pouring with water. And by the next morning we couldn't get in there with Wellingtons on at all. There was too much water in there. And so we began worrying about, we hadn't really thought about overflows. So we had to get on and dig by hand so that it didn't wash the dam away. But very soon it was looking like this, sowing some grass seed around with wildflowers in it. And it's always so rewarding when the wildlife accepts something that you plant or you make. And there you can see the wild ducks at the end that have flown in and have accepted something I've made. And it's the same pleasure if you plant a tree and then you suddenly see a bird sitting on it. It's a pleasure that is always good. When I did the pond, I just thought I was going to have a pond out in the middle of the field, and I wasn't going to do any planting. But then I had somebody gave me a gunnera, and I had some more grasses and things, and then you can see them just creeping in at the top of the pond there. And during the winter, I was making a bench under that big oak tree you can see in the background there. And I was telling John about it, my husband, and said we'd been making this bench under the 500-year-old oak tree that I'd just put in the garden. And he said, well, you can't put a 500-year-old oak tree in the garden. And I said, well, you can if you move the garden fence the other side of it. And I think you can see just behind the oak tree that the fence is now out there. And then, of course, having put a seat, you've got to do a little bit more planting so that you've got something else to look at. And the pond very quickly gets to look as though it's been there forever. Ducks there, and oxeye daisies. I've always loved oxeye daisies, and here they are in the foreground. Azaleas, deciduous azaleas, and Betula youngi in the middle of the lawn there. And the tree growing above the azaleas is Metasequoia glyptostrophoides gold rush, a golden leafed form. Now the next project, I thought I'd like to build a summer house, and I'd been putting canes around the garden in various places, trying to decide where would be nice views from and where it would be nice to sit and facing the sun most of the time. And I decided the spot was about half a field away from the garden. So then we had to build a track so that we could work on it during the winter. And there's mid-construction. That now looks like that. Eddie's White Wonder, the cornice that's just in the picture there. Putting a shelter of this sort of size out in the middle of the field, I was anxious it shouldn't look like a bus shelter, because it was those sort of dimensions. So I was determined to make it look really chunky. I think perhaps I went a bit over the top with the pillars, but still it makes a very pleasing summer house. And then a local thatcher came in and thatched it for us, which was really quite expensive. And I said, well, what if you could charge that for the summer house? What on earth does it cost to do a house? And he said, oh yes, but you've got all the difficult bits in yours, so yeah, that's why it's so expensive. But I'm just hoping it doesn't need re-thatching for quite a long time. There was a bit of autumn colour looking up through the garden towards it. And then a little bit more planting in this area. We've got Ammi on the right-hand side there, and rather a nice poppy called Ladybird. Of course, it had to be, didn't it? And then Penstemon, and a relation of the Viper's bugloss. This is Echium blue bedder, a very satisfactory annual, which I find Doesn't look too foreign out in the garden, and is very easy to grow. Now we've gone up nearer the house, and this is the terrace garden, and the summer house that we built there. In the foreground, the armillary sphere that our children gave us for our golden wedding. The trees there are Paris Chanticleer. They naturally are quite upright growing, but we do actually trim those to keep them narrow, so that they're don't cast too much shade underneath. The pillars of the summer house there were old, they were going round graves. They were the gravestones, and Tony was given the job of removing them from a churchyard so that they could mow it, and made it easy to look after. But he was supposed to put them all in the skip, these granite stones, and but he thought they were far too useful, so he's had a pile of them, or I've got a pile of them, and by cementing them together and tying them in together, we've made pillars out of them. One or two of them have got inscriptions which we hope people don't dwell on. The one that we've had to put upside down is peace after great pain. It's not really what you want to read when you're sitting there, but it's sort of weathered in and can't see it now, which is merciful. The purple and white honesty there, and Narcissus thalia, and forget-me-nots, of course, looking in the spring. And then the annual candy tuft nearest the camera there, with geraniums and other planting, and Nephophia Percy's Pride. This is one of my favourite ones. Now here we're at the other end of the terrace garden, and in the foreground, Rosa Kent, and then over on the right-hand side, Paul's Himalayan Musk. And the obelisk up in which is the focal point there, this was made up with lots of different bits of stone. The spire on the top, which you can just about pick out, was above a window in a Victorian hotel. They demolished the hotel and sold off various bits and pieces, and that was I bought it, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it, but I felt sure it could go somewhere. Now, when we'd been at the garden or the farm for 50 years, everybody kept saying, well, what are you going to do to celebrate 50 years? Well, I mean, what else could you do except plant another new bit of garden? And there I am discussing with Tony what I'm going to do. More contemplation, but you'll notice that the fence has gone from the left-hand side now to the right-hand side. And this is a nice open, sunny bit of garden, and we don't have too many of those. Getting together all the things that I was going to use, there was old rotted turf and these big stones, big rocks in the foreground. Tony couldn't use them in the landscaping because they were too big, and he couldn't use them in a domestic situation because it needed a digger to move them. So he said I could have those 5 or 6, and some gravel and horse manure, and just my idea was I wanted to create a garden that had a sunk path through the middle, so that when as it was grasses were grown on the side, you could walk right through, but you wouldn't, you couldn't see out of it. So this was after we'd excavated through the middle and built it up on the sides. And you can see what an open sort of situation it is by the grasses there. I had a lot of grasses because I bid for a nursery that was closing down. I bid for what was left of the plants at the end, and it was winter. So the only thing that looked really awful I was left with, and that was the grasses. So it was a good way of using them up. But just 1 year later, that's what it looked like. The great thing about planting herbaceous plants as opposed to shrubs, you don't have to wait for them to reach their full height, so you can get a very immediate effect with them. Because the sides were built up and I wanted to make it as easy maintenance as possible, I decided I was going to cover the whole area with wood chip, all the beds, you know, between the grasses. But I knew because they were sloping that the birds would be constantly scraping the thing on. If you had paving or grass on the bottom, you'd be constantly trying to keep it off. So I decided to make the path with wood chip as well. And it's worked really well. Other things among the grasses were autumn flowering things like sedums and Michaelmas daisies. I think sometimes a garden can look quite tired at the end of summer before the autumn colour comes in. So I wanted to create a garden that was at its best in sort of August, September. There we are looking down from the front with the sedums much in evidence. Unfortunately, rabbits do love sedums, and I can't think why, but anyway, we usually put upturned hanging baskets over them to start them off in the spring, to let them have a head start. Over to one side of the garden, sort of behind the thatched summer house, there was this depression where it was all brambles and bracken and things like that. So we decided one winter when we had a bit of time to spare to clear it. And when we cleared it, I found that actually the best soil anywhere in the garden was in this dell. So of course I then had to include that in the garden, and so there's the starting of the planting with azaleas in there, which a few years later look like that, with them beginning to fill out. And that's what it looks like now. So they really do grow extremely well there. And this is where I plant some of my sort of specials, some orchids I've got, and erythroniums. My interest in wildflowers started very early, as you can see with this picture, when I was about 3, walking through a field of our orchard, which had oxeye daisies in it. And apparently I said, I'm as tall as the daisies. So gardening started very early for me. And my father, who was a very keen gardener, encouraged me no end. Wildflowers now are on a different sort of scale. The bluebells growing at the bottom of the wildflower meadow, with the buttercups and things coming later. You can just see on the left-hand side, we mow paths through it. And we've actually got a lot of orchids coming up now. So we do like the visitors to stick to the paths. It's always a bit of a problem early in the spring before the grass has grown enough to be able to show a difference between the paths and the meadow. Orchids there. They're mostly common spotted, but I did introduce some orchids, Dactylorhiza, foliosa, and I think they've crossed because we've now got a big variation in the colour of them, but they do look rather spectacular. One of the most useful modern things I have is I bought this golf buggy some years ago, and it's particularly good for going out to the far parts of the garden. And there I am showing my sister-in-law, who has walking difficulties, through the wildflower meadow. You see, what we've done is we've welded a box on the back, and you can imagine how when I go out to look at something, I always do a bit of weeding, and then the box is full up with weeds by the time I get home. Now, just to finish with the, this is what the aerial picture of the farm looked like before I really got going. And there you can see just a bit of garden in front of the house there, and that's the old house. And then the farmyard in the at the back there with the cows waiting in the field, and that's what it looks like now. So you can see I've expanded no end, and that's the nursery and the car park, and the garden goes right out to that ploughed field in the background. Noel said that I'd written a book. I think that's probably one of the most difficult things I've done, but it's done now. I started it about 25 years ago and just jotted down a few things, and it came to fruition last year, and Noel very kindly wrote the foreword for me. We started by an open door, and now we're finishing with a closed gate. And well, I can't say exactly that's the end, because we do own 35 acres, but I've no plans at the moment. So that's, I hope, given you an interesting tour around my garden. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful, Mary. What a fantastic garden. What a story.
Mm-hmm.
And how lovely to see those before and during and after photographs, especially with the children involved and the grandchildren. That's, you know, it's fantastic passing on that.
We don't often get before photographs, do we? And
no. And it
actually.
It just describes the garden so beautifully. And I love the way that you embrace yellow and oranges, because often they're not very popular in gardens.
No,
it's so nice to see somebody really enjoying their yellows and oranges.
Yes.
How many people do you have working in the garden? Because it's a lot of garden to look after.
Yes. Well, we reckon everybody's part-time. Mm-hmm. My grandson works 4 days a week, and he's sort of the main worker. And we reckon that it's something like 12 man days, but the rest of people who do 1 day or 2 days, or
right.
And then since the pandemic, we've had quite a few volunteers who have joined us,
right,
which is about the only upside of the pandemic.
Yes. Now somebody's asking where to get the book. They've already looked on Amazon and they can't find it. This is Angela.
If you go to our website,
right, it's on.
You can do it through that.
And your website is it burrowfarm.co?
Burrowfarmgardens.co.uk.
So Burrow Farm Gardens, all one word, .co.uk. Wonderful. Yes. I think we're going to have a rush on books now.
Good.
Oh, there you are. That's lovely.
Mary, could I unpack a little bit more about this, the relationship between the garden and the farm? I mean, you alluded to the fact that your husband was, glad you were kind of confined in the quarry for a bit before you, the old clay pit, before you clearly broke out. I mean, there must have been I mean, a farmer does not hand over his valuable land that easily. I was wondering, at some particular point, when did the garden begin to become a business, and therefore, no doubt changed its
Well, my idea was always from the very beginning was it had to be self-supporting. So my idea was that I made it a commercial in inverted commas. I like to feel it's still very much a private garden,
yes,
but public come to it. And so from the very beginning, that was the idea. I went to a garden that was open years ago, and bought some plants there, and went to and there was tea nearby, not in the garden. And I thought, this is a perfect day out, I think. And I'm sure, as we live in the West Country, there's lots of tourists, that it could be a commercial thing. But, well, it was a little bit, as far as the land was concerned, for quite a while. But when the farming went into decline, that was my opportunity, really.
yes.
And so I swallowed up more, and it's certainly a lot more profitable than farming. But the whole, people sort of tend to think it's a big garden, therefore it must have cost a lot of money. But in fact, what happened was the Roman clay pit had quite a few big trees in it, and I tried to plant some wild rhododendrons and found that the shade was too dense. So we had to have some out, and we had a friend who was a forester, and together we went round and marked some of the trees to be felled. But of course they had to be winched up from the bottom, which was not a cheap option. So we had to get rid of some big oaks to to pay for it. And he judged it very well, because I ended up with £15. And that £15 is what I've spent on the garden. But then, of course, when I started opening, I've ploughed the money back into it ever since. But it is truly a £15 garden.
That's fantastic. That's utterly fantastic. And did you have any problem with change of use from farmland to garden land, Mary? Was that ever an issue?
Well, I didn't know anything about it. That you had to, if it was your land, I thought you did what you liked.
Yeah.
So I was about 5 or 6, probably 10 years into making it. And suddenly the council got wind of it and came to see whether it was all right. And they refused permission for us to open it, which was absolutely devastating. But I then realized you could open for 28 days without planning permission.
Right.
So we started on that with the National Garden Scheme.
Yeah.
And then we reapplied because 2 of our neighbours, the main objection to me opening it was the access on the road.
Right.
It was a bit on the narrow side, but our neighbours either side sold me a little bit of land so that I could do a decent splay. And so, having overcome that objection, I didn't want to bring myself to their notice again. So I didn't reapply. But the minute they started charging me business rates, I felt they knew. So
yeah. Oh, great. No, because it is. I think it's often an issue, isn't it? If you want to use fields for garden use. But
yes, but I truly knew nothing about it when I started.
Yeah, well, that was the right way to be, really, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's an aspect of planning law which isn't particularly well known and actually not particularly well enforced. I've been sort of fairly close to that myself, or with gardens I've managed, and it. What actually? I think there might be some interesting legal stuff about what actually is a garden at some point. But So yes, but it certainly is there. And if you are doing anything commercial, then you do have to get it right.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, we've had lots of lovely comments, Mary, that we will send to you in the chat box. So how wonderful and how enjoyable. So we'll definitely copy those and send those on to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it was just a wonderful story, and it is just so lovely to see those photographs, those befores and afters, and during. You know, that's such a useful thing, because to see where you started out from, and the parts of the garden that sort of changed a little bit too, like
Yes.
your wall that was the Crataegus hedge, and now is that lovely wall. And yeah, so what's your next project? Have you got a sort of secret project that you're allowed to say what it might be or not?
I'm not.
You're not allowed to
myself to that at the moment. But it all depends. You know, you can't just create something and not be able to manage it.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It is all about help, and I need another good bit of inspiration, really.
Right, yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I'm definitely going to call in on my way down through the West Country on my next jaunts. I shall definitely veer off towards you at Axminster.
Jolly good, thank you.
And lovely. Well, thank you so much. It's been really delightful.
It's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, good luck, and I hope you have a good summer. And yeah, I'll try and come down and see you before too long.
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. All the best. Thanks everybody for joining. Thank you, Mary. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.